So we spent a lot of time talking about magic, geography, biology, all the really kind of big things that go into building a fantasy world. But today we're going to talk about something a lot further down on our world-building triangle, and that's cultural identity and how it can improve the story by creating interpersonal conflicts between characters to create a better group dynamic. Hi, I'm Matt, and once a week I break down world-building techniques, tricks, and tips. Sometimes we build things on the fly, as we're going to do today, as we build a whole D&D group based around cultural identity. I hope you stick around. As to that world-building triangle that I alluded to, we always start really big with the big stuff like geography and biology, and these cause more changes to the world, and it all filters down eventually into culture. And even though we don't spend much time talking about that, it's actually where most of the stuff happens and is a lot of what brings the reader in. And some of the more interesting stuff, especially in my opinion, as I point out, like Star Trek really kind of hit the nail on the head when they why do we do science fiction and fantasy, and that's to explore, seek out new life and new civilizations to boldly go with no man has gone before. The new civilizations is a big part of that. To me personally, the best parts of Game of Thrones where the characters were encountering a new culture. Jon out with the wildlings, Daenerys with all sorts of cultures that she walked through. Even watching the Starks have to interact in King's Landing was taking them into a new cultural milieu and watching what happens. So yeah, we're going to look at that today, cultural identity, which is self-concept based on nationality, ethnicity, social class, generations, and locality. But first, before we dig into all of that, let's talk about conflict. That's really kind of the heart of your story, and as everything we do world building here is usually built with a narrative focus. You can definitely use this for your D&D games, which I'm going to kind of do with this today, but you need conflict, and conflict is a struggle between two opposing forces, things hitting each other. It's impediments. It's what makes the story interesting, because otherwise you say, well, he went there, got this, and won. Like, that's not a great story. That's like a 5-year-old telling you how their day was. It's just a recitation of events. What you need is a goal. Character wants something, rescue the princess, let's say, and first thing, oh, there's a bridge down. Well, that's an impediment. What do I do? How do I get around that conflict? And it's all about resolving the conflicts, the little impediments along the way. And technically there's only two types of conflict. That's internal, as in what's going on inside of the character's mind and spirit and all of that, and external, which is those things outside of the character, as the name connotes or denotes. Anyways, even though there's a break into those two, when I worked managing screenwriters who were doing coverage of screenplays, we broke out the third one, which is interpersonal, which is to say in between the characters themselves, conflicts like that. That falls under external technically, but it really is its own thing and is important. And as to interpersonal conflict, a lot of times that means the characters can share the same goal. So, if there was an external conflict, it would be like, I'm trying to go there and this assassin is in the way trying to kill me and then I have to defeat them. That's an external conflict. Interpersonal would be me and my brother are going to go rob that bank and I think no one should be killed, and my brother's like, yeah, we're going to kill a whole bunch of folks, which I think, what was that movie? Hell or High Water. Good movie, you should go see it. Anyways, so that's interpersonal, as in you both share the same goals but have difference of opinion on how to reach it, and then conflict will arise between the two characters trying to reach the same goal. And general rule of thumb for stories is more conflict is better because it creates more drama, and that's within reason. Don't just like keep throwing stuff in, but the more the characters can conflict, the more conflict you have, the more things in the way, the more trouble the internal conflict the character has about achieving the goals, and the more conflict the group has, kind of makes for a better story. It makes it more interesting, because otherwise, again, it's just a recitation of events. These are the things that happened along the way. Now back to cultural identity. It breaks down into, 5 categories? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 categories. Nationality, that means the state or the government, where you're from in terms of a political body. It doesn't have to be political in a state society. You could be an acephalous civilization, which is like herders or something like that, hunter and gatherers. So it doesn't need to be. It does kind of help, though, to have like a nationality, an idea of where you're from. Game of Thrones is great about that. It has all the houses and what they mean, and being a Stark and coming from that nationality kind of thing is very different than being is very different from being a Lannister, which is very different from being whoever the people are who did the Drowned Gods, et cetera, et cetera. Ethnicity, as we've spoken about in breaking down race, ethnicity, and species, is, similarities based on a shared language, ancestry, history, society, or social treatment. It can sometimes have a physical taxonomy that goes with it, as in people who look this way are from that nation. We do use that as a shorthand a lot of times, which can be problematic when you're doing it, so be wary when you do it. But the whole idea of a shared ancestor, or like I'm Scottish from this clan, that means something to someone, that's not a great one, but yeah, that's that can be considered an ethnicity. LGBTQ can also kind of fall under ethnicity, as in it's a social treatment, as in an identification with a group that is maybe outside the norm, maybe depends on how you're doing it in your story, but again, different social treatment based upon what you are socially. Social class is where you are in the hierarchy, the social strata of your society. It's usually broken down into upper, middle, and lower. Middle is actually a fairly new creation. Like we talk about it a lot, the middle class of America, but it is actually in the grand scheme of things, it's very short. Back in medieval times, which we crib a lot from, there was lord and peasant, but also there was the merchant class, the artisans, that kind of thing. So you can have different social classes that are more than upper, middle, and lower. Generational is where you break down in your aging in age. There's a book, Generations, that I actually have, but it's over there, which I loved when I was growing up in college and such, and it kind of breaks down America's into 20-year cycles of people who are born around the same period, so share the same things growing up that others didn't. So being born and raised in the 90s, very different than my parents who were raised in the 60s, with an outlook on life based upon when we were born. Game of Thrones has a great example with the, oh, you sweet summer child, they have never been through winter, us older folks have, so you can see the differences based on generality. Locality is the small scale community where you grew up, and so you have shared experience based on the location in which, that shaped you, that kind of thing. Davos talks about, being raised in Flea Bottom, that has a generational, it has a locality thing for him. One of my favorites is from Captain America Civil War, when Spider-Man and Captain America are faced off and Captain America wins. He's like, basically, I like your pluck, kid, where are you from? You're like, Queens. You're like, Brooklyn. That is a sign of locality, as in that means something to the two characters, but it doesn't quite mean as much to the to the viewers, or maybe it does if you're there. I'm from Dallas originally, so saying someone's from Highland Park is very different than Pleasant Grove. So locality shapes what you do, and all of these kind of feed on each other. So like I said, being from a locality that is poor might change your social class and or your ethnicity, and so all of them kind of work together to create conflict with other characters, though they are not dependent. Just because you're from a poor area doesn't mean you're one of the poor people, and a good writer, creator will use all those things and put them together to make conflict within the group, which is what we're going to focus on today. A lot of times in basic D&D stuff, Vox Machina, they use character races and classes, and I mean classes as in the character class. So your barbarian, barbarian half giant, I think. Yeah, giant is much different than the rogue gnome, who is going to be different than the elven thieves or rogues, that kind of thing. So they create conflict, kind of like dwarves and elves, they don't like each other. But we're not going to do that today. We are going to do something different. We're going to take that same kind of dynamic of a character group, a D&D character group, but we're going to do all humans, and we're going to mix up all of their cultural identities to try to create conflict between them. And the conflict is going to be kind of bog standard. There is a princess who has been captured by a dragon deep in the wild woods, and the characters have to navigate their way there. We're going to have two fighters, a cleric, a rogue, and a mage. And they're all going to be human, and we are going to randomly assign them traits from going in here. So fighter one is going to have, each one's going to get 2 traits, is going to have nationality, going to be one of his things, or her, we haven't decided yet, and generation. Fighter 2 is going to be generation. All right, that's going to be interesting. And locality. Cleric is going to be class and ethnicity. Rogue is ethnicity and locality. And our mage, final one, we have some extra ones in here just to make it interesting. Nationality and, well, nationality again, so that does not work. We'll throw that one in. And class. So, gonna give me a few minutes. I'm going to design this group on this mission, and we are going to see how their conflicts are going to be increased. Interpersonal conflicts are increased as the group dynamic based upon, All right, so we're about 10 minutes later, and it's lunchtime, and I don't have much more time, so we're gonna go do this real quick. Now you can see I kind of color-coded it real quick with the types. I could trace the conflict between them. So, fighter one, I've decided he's gonna be kind of like a berserker tank. He comes from a civilization that is actually very meritocratic because it's all about strength. You gain your power based upon how, your status based on how strong you are. So he comes from that. Meanwhile, the mage and pretty much all the other characters came from, your traditional kind of, medieval situation with, the lords and then everyone else below and that kind of thing. So they're going to have conflict based on, their idea of what's right and wrong based on the nations they grew up in. Their nations have been at war and are now at an uneasy peace. So, you can see that kind of thing. These two have the same locality, so I'm saying that this was a knight. The second one is an older knight because he was generational. Is an older knight from this traditional society kind of thing, so honor, that all kind of thing. Grew up in the capital and thinks the capital is great because he grew up there. Meanwhile, our rogue over here grew up, which we're going to get to in just a second, had a very different experience of growing up in the capital because of it. Cleric, we had ethnicity and class. I'm going to say that his ethnicity comes from a group of nomads that are always wandering around, looked at very they never collect things or wealth because of it, so they're usually looked down upon in society. So he had a high, but he's actually a high class. So this is where we're making not just conflict interpersonal because the rogue has the same ethnicity, but this cleric, came from this low class, but became religious, became the cleric, and moved up in society into upper class. So has led an upper class life, even though ethnicity means that usually lower class. So not only is the character in conflict with another, in conflict with themselves of, how, should I have done this? Did I sell out? That kind of thing. So you can use use this again for interpersonal and internal conflict. Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, and as I said, the rogue is going to have the same ethnicity. They maintained their nomadic way of life. We're a thief, as this nomad society is considered. Think of them, Romani kind of thing, as an analog, we can use that. And as such, this rogue was captured and grew up in the city as a slave, toiling away to pay off the thieving. So, we have a knight and a rogue that are in conflict because of their character class, but is backed up with the ethnicity. So they don't. The rogue and the cleric. The rogue thinks the cleric is a sellout, which creates more conflict between them interpersonally, and pokes at the internal conflict of the cleric. And rogue hates the old knight because the old knight represents the society that kept him down and kept him in slaves for a while. The mage we're doing it started as low class, nation that does not like the nation of the berserker, as neither would the old knight for that matter. Oh, and the old knight, again, we have a difference in young and old, how they view things between the two warriors. So young warrior, let's go charge into battle, and old knight's like, yeah, my joints are doing this, we're going to plan this out because I don't have that many battles in me. So conflict between them that way. And this mage was a low class and doesn't like the high class cleric because I've spent all my time and every cent of my own while learning magic, while you get your magic just kind of handed to you from your god. Again, conflict. It really makes a good group dynamic. So when they come to, how are we going to rescue the princess? How are we going to attack this dragon? They all have different ideas based upon their upbringing and their social identities, cultural identities. Like I was writing a scene last night, it was kind of fun. It was just these characters based on, not these characters, but my characters, just trying to order dinner. And all of them have different backgrounds, different ideas. One's vegan, and it's like, well, I can't have the pizza. You're like, but there's supposed to be a consensus. We all get pizza. Pizza's for everyone. Like, I'm not eating that. Which is a generational thing, which is class, that kind of thing. So keep cultural identity in mind when you're creating your group. It can add a lot to the story by adding to the conflict. And I hope it can help you build better worlds and characters.